You're working on a documentary now about nuclear energy.
Yes.
So it's interesting to talk about this.
Yes.
Energy is such a big part of the world, about the geopolitics of the world, about the way the world is. What do you think is the role of nuclear energy in the 21st
It's a good
century?
question. And first of all, obviously, everyone's talking about climate change, right? So here I wake up to that a few years ago. I picked up a book by Josh Goldstein and his co-author, who's Swedish. Those two wrote a book called Bright Future, A Bright Future. It came out a few years ago, and I lapped it up. It was a book fact-based, clear, not too long, and not too technical, and it was very clear that they were in favor of all kinds of renewable energy, yes. Made it very clear how dangerous oil and gas were, and made it very clear to the layman like me, and at the same time said that this renewables can work so far. But the gap is enormous as to how much electricity the world is going to need in 2050 and beyond. 2, 3, 4 times. We don't even know the damage. But we have India, we have China, we have Africa, we have Asia coming onto the scene wanting more and more electricity. So they address the problem as a global one, not just as often in the United States. You get the ethnocentric United States point of view that we're doing well, blah, blah, blah. We're not doing well. We spend more energy than anybody, this country, per capita. And at the same time, we don't seem to understand the global picture. So that's what they did. And they made me very aware. So the only way to close that gap, the only way in their mind, is nuclear energy. And talking about a gap of building a huge amount of reactors over the next 30 years and starting now. They make that point over and over again. Obviously, this country, the United States, is not going to go in that direction because it just is incapable with its political will. And fear is a huge factor. And still, a lot of shibboleths, a lot of myths about nuclear energy have confused and confounded the landscape. The environmentalists have played a huge role in doing good things, many good things, but also confusing and confounding the landscape and making accusations against nuclear energy that were exaggerated. So taking all these things into consideration, we set about making this documentary, which is about now almost finishing. It's an hour and 40 minutes, and that was a hard part, getting it down from about 3.5 hours to about this something more manageable. And
Is it interviews?
it's interviews among others, but essentially we went to Russia, we went to France, which is the most perhaps advanced nuclear country in the world, Russia, and the United States. We went to the Idaho laboratory and talked to the scientists there, as well as the Department of Energy people. Idaho is one of the experimental labs in the United States. It's probably one of the most advanced, and they're doing a lot of advanced nuclear there. Well, Russia gave us a lot of insight. We're very cooperative because actually the probably most advanced nuclear reactor in the world at Beloyarsk in the Ural Mountains. So we did an investigation there. And in France, they have some very advanced nuclear reactors, and they're building. The Green Party came into power, and when Hollande was president, they started to move away from it. Actually, they were beginning to close down some of the nuclear reactors. There was talk of that, but thank God France did not do that. And Macron came in and recently reversed it, and they're building as fast as they can now, especially with the Ukraine war going on. There's an awareness that Russia may not be providing the energy Europe needs. And then China is the other one, too. That's the other factor. I'm talking about the big boys. They are doing tremendous work and fast, which is very hopeful. But of course, China is building in all directions at once. Coal continues to be huge in China, and methane too. Coal in India and China are the biggest users of coal. As you know, Germany went back to coal a few years ago. So all these factors, it's a fascinating picture globally. So we try to achieve a consensus that where nuclear can work and where it will be working, it will be used more and more. The question is how much carbon dioxide China and Russia will be putting out. France is the only one that's not putting it out. The United States has not changed. With all the talk and all the nonsense about renewables and the new lifestyle and all this, it's great for your guilt complex, but it doesn't do anything for the total accumulation of carbon dioxide in the world.
Who's going to lead the way on nuclear, do you think? You mentioned Russia, France, China, United States. Who's going to lead?
I don't think it's going to be a United Nations kind of thing because the world doesn't seem capable of uniting. We go to these conferences, Kyoto, and we talk and we agree, but then we don't actually enforce. So I don't think it can happen that way. I think it's going to be an individual race with countries. They're going to just do it for their own self-interest, like China is doing it. The thing is, if it works, and I'm praying that it will really work on a big scale, China will back away from coal naturally. The same thing will be true of India. They will see the benefits. because if you go to India, you see the cities, the pollution, you walk around in that stuff. There's no hope in this, and you sense it. So people will move in this direction naturally because nuclear is clean energy. And the amount of casualties of nuclear is the lowest on the industrial scale for energy producing, from coal down to oil, everything. The lowest casualty rate, very lowest, 0.002 or something, is nuclear. So not that many people have died from nuclear. Not that many. I think 50 people at Chernobyl, which was the worst accident. Nobody died at Fukushima. Nobody died at 3 Mile Island, and that's what you hear all over and over again. The environmentalists have sold us the idea that they're dangerous. A lot of environmentalists, thank God, are changing. They've come off that routine, and they've saying, we were wrong. We've done a lot of good work. Greenpeace did a lot of good work. Whales, saving this, saving that. They admit themselves, not they don't, but people who have been in the organization have said, we were wrong. In 1956, we show the articles in the New York Times that came out, the Rockefeller Foundation, which of course is a big producer of oil. The foundation came out with a study which was weighted, put a thumb on the scale, but it was a scientific expose of radiation in the study that printed in the New York Times because the New York Times publisher Sulzberger was on their board. He was one of the board members. So they got a lot of strong publicity condemning radiation, which started the process of doubting nuclear energy. The radiation levels that they pointed out were very minor. And of course, if you go into a scientific analysis of this now with what we know, it's just not true. It tilted the scale back in the 50s, 60s, and started the questioning the nuclear business.
Do you think that was malevolence or incompetence?
No, I think it was competition. I don't think it was conspiracy as much as it was a sense that nuclear energy is going to end the dominance of oil. Absolutely. Yeah. And it will anyway, because it's the only sane way for the world to proceed. But the world will have to learn through adversity. So in other words, this situation could get worse, and certain countries are just going to have to adapt like we always do. When things become too hard, you have to change your thinking.
And humans are pretty good at that.
Yes, talking about human nature, they're very adept at that. Germany, for example, when the Fukushima happened, they went out of the nuclear business. That was shocking to me. They just pulled out and they destroyed several of their nuclear reactors that were still functioning and put up coal. And as a result, Germany drifted into this place next to France. Their electricity bills went up and France stayed the same. They have a different system in Europe, but more or less, no question that France was doing a lot better than Germany. And now, with this Ukraine issue, it's a very interesting fulcrum point, whether Germany, what direction they're going to go now. How can they keep going with coal? They just can't.